got some good stuff to jump into today, and if I'm completely honest with you, it's not an exciting message for me to share with you today because it's a hard one. And I want to invite you to kind of lean forward a little bit, to kind of settle in, to kind of maybe even buckle your seatbelt a little bit, because we're going to learn a little bit about how Jesus challenges us today. Remember, last week, we talked a little bit about how Jesus is the one who goes after people who are culturally conceived to be lost causes, right? So he meets the woman at the well. This woman who her whole town would say, they'd say a whole lot of things about her, but they certainly wouldn't say that she is part of their culture. They wouldn't want to be associated with her. And Jesus meets her at the well and makes her, who everyone else would say is a lost cause, feel at home. He invites her into relationship. And we see Jesus begin balancing this kind of way of engaging with people between invitation and challenge. You remember last week we talked about how Jesus is the one that brings hope to lost causes, right? That even hope springs eternal, even for people who would count themselves out of the race, or who other people might say they're too addicted, they're too far gone, they're too detached, they haven't been in church since that time, and so everyone else might say they're a lost cause. Jesus comes and steps into our lives like he did the woman at the well and says, you're not a lost cause. In fact, my hope is for an eternity. Hope springs eternal. Now, I gotta make a little confession to you. As I was standing up here in my Cubs jersey last week and talking about how it's the start of a new baseball season, I'm a big Chicago Cubs fan. I come from Chicago. And really, it's Cubs fans who have kind of coined the phrase, I'm sure, that hope springs eternal. Well, after a miserable start, losing several games in extra innings, and now getting off to this pace of a 1-4 start, we are well on our way to proving that hope is dead for this season. It's over already, you guys. It's already done. We're already chalking it up in the loss column. It's going to be a tough season again. But there's always next year, right? I mean, that's what Cubs fans say. There's always next year, and one of these years we're going to shake this nickname of being the lovable losers. You know, we get this, our mascot is this little cubby bear. That's just this cute little innocent cubby bear, and so we're known as the lovable losers. I'm ready to shake that, you guys. So hope for this year, yeah, it's probably dead. But next year, or maybe the year after that, or maybe the year after that, it's coming one of these years. So my hope for this year, while it's dead, it still springs eternal because there's still more seasons to come. Now, what's funny is the way that Jesus went about inviting people into relationship is he'd bring hope into them. He'd bring hope into their minds, into their hearts by the way that he invited them. And today, we're going to move from invitation to challenge. And to kind of set the way for that, I want to take a moment and draw some more stuff up on the screen. And so if you would, grab a pad of paper and a pen at your table. This is a great tool that you can use that we learned from Jesus all throughout Scripture. We see him balancing this balance between invitation and challenge. So let's say we take two spectrums, okay? A spectrum, one of them that has high invitation. Let's put, I don't know what I'm hitting here. How do I close this thing? There we go. Let's put invitation up here, okay? High invitation up there, and down here we're going to put low invitation, okay? And that's a spectrum, okay? If you're at the top, you're experiencing high invitation. I'll define that a little bit more for us in just a second. But then we're going to cross that spectrum with another one, creating a little grid for us. And all the way to the right, you would have high challenge. And all the way to the left on that grid, you'd have, anybody guess? Low challenge. Awesome. Half of you are awake this morning. Way to go. There's low challenge. Right? So we have this grid of high invitation, low invitation, and high challenge and low challenge. And by invitation, essentially, if you could sum it up in one phrase, it would mean essentially this: I love you no matter what. Words of high invitation express unconditional love that knows no boundary, inviting you into relationship even if your past looks pretty bumpy, inviting you to belong even when your behavior would say you haven't really earned that. So all throughout the the Gospels, we see Jesus experiencing this, and we talked about it a lot last week. It's essentially Jesus going after the lost cause. He's going to extend relationship, invite people into relationship when maybe everyone else is kind of keeping them from it. Make sense? You with me? Invitation, an invitation to belong. Okay? Challenge, on the other hand, when invitation says, I love you no matter what, challenge says, I love you too much to let you stay the way you are. So Jesus, he doesn't just settle for the status quo. He doesn't just let people belong in relationship, but he wants people to grow while they're in relationship. And today, we got some words of challenge from God's word. So if we were to kind of play this out a little bit on this grid, maybe up in this top left-hand corner, you'd probably say that this is a very cozy culture, wouldn't you? Because it's high invitation, low challenge. Hey, we're having a lot of fun here. We're having a blast. We're not really going anywhere. There's not a whole lot of purpose. Nobody's really challenging us very much. So let's just get cozy, right? If you had a low challenge, low invitation culture, that bottom left-hand quadrant, you'd probably get very bored, wouldn't you? And this is boring. One, I don't feel like I belong here, low invitation. Two, we're not going anywhere, low challenge, right? So we're sitting here doing nothing and nobody likes each other, right? That's that bored culture. Now, if you were to move over to the right, this is probably the one that you most closely resonate with when it comes to work, right? Man, because this is all challenge and low invitation. In your workplace, the ends justify the means, right? Doesn't matter what you have to do or how often you have to do it or how many hours you got to spend doing it, just get the results, right? Pump out the product, sell it, do whatever you got to do, get it out there, meet the demands, while you probably don't really have this great bubbly feeling towards the people that you work with maybe. And I hope this isn't your workplace. I hope your workplace is awesome. But a lot of times, people get really stressed out, right? You create a culture of stress. Because there's very little belonging, low invitation. Nobody really seems to be alongside you in this journey. They might be doing work alongside you in the journey, but they don't really care about your job. It's just, let's get it done, right? But what we find up in the top right culture, where there's high invitation, lots of belonging, lots of I love you no matter what, but there's also lots of challenge, is where we find a discipling culture. Where discipleship is happening normally, it's happening often. Where invitation, I love you no matter what, meets challenge, I love you too much to let you stay the way you are. In today's reading, if you read this chapter, Jesus, the Son of God, if you were reading it this week, and if not, read it this week, take home a copy of the story with you. But if you were reading along, you'll notice Jesus brings a lot of words of challenge, where he's just not letting us stay where we're at. He loves us too much to let us just stay here. And so here's where we need to fasten our seatbelts a little bit. And just get ready for what Jesus has for us. Turn to that page, chapter 25, page 353. Page 353. Open it up here in the story. And I want us to just see what Jesus does here as he's interacting with a crowd and as he's interacting with his disciples. Page 353, chapter 25, right at the beginning. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." "But you, what about you? Who do you say I am?" I love how Peter, if you read through here, you see that Peter is always the first one to chime in. In fact, read on a little bit later, and Peter finds himself in a situation in the Transfiguration where he doesn't know what to say, but he just keeps on talking anyways. Don't you love that? I mean, a guy who talks before he thinks. He just kind of lays it all out there. He's a guy who wears his thoughts on his sleeves. So here's what he says, Jesus, you are the Messiah. And then Jesus warned them not to tell them anything about him. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed after 3 days, rise again. He spoke plainly about this. And Peter, oh, classic Peter, don't you love this? Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Can you imagine rebuking Jesus? Jesus, hold on a second. No, you got it all wrong, buddy. Let me tell you how it's really supposed to go, right? Are you kidding, Peter? You're going to pull Jesus aside and tell him he's got it all wrong? This is the Son of God here. I think he's got one up on you, don't you think? And yet Peter pulls him aside and begins to rebuke him, wanting and desiring Jesus not to die. Because Peter has this heart to continue to experience this relationship, i.e. invitation with Jesus. Jesus has come alongside and made Peter belong like he's never belonged in any people group ever before. And so if you're Peter, you're clearly saying, Jesus, I don't want you to die. I don't want you to be crucified. I don't want any of that to happen. I want to keep what we got going on here. This is a good thing. What does Jesus do? But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. Get behind me, Satan, he said. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. See, it's at this point that the disciples are really starting to catch on. And maybe they still have a lot more to catch on too, but they're starting to catch on to the fact that Jesus was on a mission to save all people. And then in order for that to really happen, he would have to die in their place. Their friend, their pal, their mentor, their rabbi, their teacher, their brother who they've been doing life with is now going to be brutally tortured, mocked, and crucified. And they're catching on to that. Jesus is starting to reveal this to them. So then Jesus takes his disciples, goes back to the crowd, and says this at the bottom of that page. He says, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, now if you have your copy of the story, or if you're following along somewhere else, or whatever it may be, I would write down these words, because here's where we're going to set up camp today. Jesus says to all these folks, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. And he goes on, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. He goes on to ask this question. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels on Judgment Day. Let me go back to these words here. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. See, the mission of God, this is where we have to start. The mission of God is to restore all people back to a right relationship with God, with himself, right? Since creation, you go all the way back to Genesis chapter 1 and 2, everything is easy peasy. Man, it's good. Man has a great relationship with God. There's no sin to separate them. And we get so far into the book, we make it all the way to chapter 3 before we mess it all up. Man, are we good or what? Mankind messes it up. Now sin has entered the world, and we are forever, until Jesus comes back one day, completely separated from God. But the only way that we can have relationship with God is if Jesus, the Son of God, fully perfect, fully man, would come to earth and lay down his life in place of yours. That he would live the perfect life you can't and die the death you deserve so that you could have a right relationship with God once again. The mission of God is to restore all people back to himself. The method of God is his church, his followers. See, when God wants to restore all people back to himself, he could probably do it in lots of different ways, but the way that he wants to demonstrate his love is through you, through the church, through his followers. And so he has to set us absolutely straight. He has to tell us, if you want to be that, if you want to be my followers, if you want to be the church, then you must deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow him. Is that seatbelt tight enough for you yet? It's not exactly a fun thing for me to invite you to essentially die to yourself. But that's exactly what I want to extend to you today, is an invitation to come and die. That sounds pretty morbid. Sounds kind of brutal. I think I'm starting to sweat just a little bit more saying that in front of you. Now, here's not what I'm saying. This isn't some cultish saying. It's not like we're going to, go in the back room and everybody, we're not going to have a death party back there or something like that, okay? That's not what's happening here. And that's not what Jesus is asking for. What he's saying is everything that is of you, every one of your worldly desires need to be put to death so that you can truly live in me, is what Jesus is saying. That's why he says, anybody who wants to save his life, in other words, kind of hoard everything to themselves, try to gather up as much as they can for themselves, everybody who wants to try to just make it through, let's just survive this thing called life. Anybody who wants to save their life, Jesus says, will lose it. Because you've spent all your time just trying to hang on. And at the end of the day, your ability to hang on isn't good enough. Because the gap for sin is still too wide. You can't make the leap. But then Jesus says, whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save his life. You see, in order for there to be true life, there must be death before it. Anybody enjoy salsa? Like not salsa dancing. I mean, that's not so much my thing. Salsa dancing is your thing. That's good. I'm excited for you. That's great. But salsa, I mean, chips and salsa. Anybody enjoys chips and salsa? Oh, okay. Man, maybe we should start serving it on Sunday mornings. That'd be kind of fun, wouldn't it? Chips and salsa. Now, I got to admit, I enjoy chips and salsa, but when I married Mia, it went to a whole new level, you guys. Mia is a connoisseur of salsa. In fact, right now, I think we have some kind of peach mango salsa at home. Oh, it's like this perfect blend of sweet, salty, little bit of spice in there, And I'm sure there's plenty of great Mexican joints around here that you can go to that maybe have your favorite salsa. How many of you are more like the restaurant thin, really soupy, like really thin kind of salsa? How many of you is that your kind of salsa? You better be raising your hand on that. Absolutely. Because I don't really enjoy that kind. I'm more the thick and chunky. Anybody thick and chunky? Absolutely. Oh, man. I told you they'd win the day on that one. Thick and chunky's the way to go. See, now, if you think about what goes into the salsa, you got your tomatoes, you got your cilantro, maybe it's peaches and mango, maybe it's, if it's guacamole, you got some avocados, all kinds of spices that you put into it. But I want you to consider, in order for salsa to really be good, in order for you to really enjoy salsa, all those fruits and vegetables that you put in there, they have to be picked off the vine, don't they? Or they have to be picked off the tree. In other words, they have to be taken from their life source. They have to essentially die, be cut up into all those pieces, put into a food processor maybe, and put into the salsa for you to enjoy it. In order for you to enjoy good salsa, those vegetables have to die. You have to pull them off the vine, don't you? See, what Jesus keeps on saying is that in order for there to be true life, abundant life, full life, something's got to die. And I think if Jesus is going to call us as his church, as his followers, to really be people who continue to serve in this city and be his church in this city, to love our neighbors around them, to be gracious to them and ask them to be gracious to us when maybe their time is a little short or our temper's a little bit short, in order for us to serve in this city, to really show mercy and love and compassion in this city, then my guess is each and every single one of us is going to have to put to death all of our own desires. Because at the end of the day, our own desires are pretty self-serving, aren't they? I mean, can't we be a little bit selfish? I'll be the first to admit I'm kind of a selfish guy. See, but the heart of Jesus is one of compassion and giving away. But we miss out on that if we don't first go to die. If you were here a couple of weeks ago and stuck around for the revival concert that was here, you got to laugh and have a lot of fun and eat some good food, and it was a really good time. And to see the concert up here was just a blast. But there was a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven that I don't think I've ever seen before that happened during that concert. That day we were benefiting an organization called Thistle Farms. And Thistle Farms is a great organization that provides jobs to women who come out of really tough situations. In fact, there's another nonprofit called Magdalene. And Magdalene finds these women who have been on the street, are in addicted situations, or come from broken relationships, abusive relationships, anything down to prostitution. I mean, just you name it. If they've come from that kind of a tough past, Magdalene tries to find them and restore them. And over 2 years, they go through this Magdalene program and begin to let God just restore them, continue to bring joy and hope into their lives. And after they get out of that 2 years of Magdalene, then they get to work at Thistle Farms. And so we did this benefit where all the proceeds went to benefit Thistle Farms. And some of the ladies from Thistle Farms came up on the stage and started singing with Bonnie. And one of them, her name's Doris, she came and sang a song that she wrote that was a thank you to the folks at Thistle Farms for the new life that she now has. Because she wouldn't have been able to find her way out of that unless somebody else made the sacrifices for her to be there. And she came up, she told her story in front of all the folks here and sang in that microphone that song, a message of thankfulness to all of the people, and she named some of them in her song, to all the people who had made the sacrifices for her to be there. All the folks that put together Thistle Farms and Magdalene, all the folks that interacted in her life to be a blessing to her when everyone else in this city would probably look at her and say, she's a lost cause. Those folks died to themselves, said, we want to follow Jesus, and we're going to be a blessing to this woman. We're going to be a blessing in this city. We're going to give this person another chance. And those folks, they responded to the call of Jesus to deny themselves, or as Philippians 2 says it, to consider others better than yourselves, to deny yourself, to pick up your cross and to follow him. And that death, if you will, that death of denying yourself, picking up your cross and following Jesus, responding to that call of Jesus on your life, to deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow him. Where there is death, soon comes life. And Doris is a living example of that. She has new life. Because there were some disciples, there were some followers of Jesus who were willing to value her over themselves. To be honest, this conversation that we need to continue to have, we can't just cap it off nicely this week. And I want it to just kind of sit in your hearts this week. And please come back next week, because this is one of those messages that has the tendency to thin the herd a little bit, because it's daunting, it's tough, it's hard, it's very challenging, right? This is high challenge. But I want you to just consider what it looks like for you to give your life away, to die to yourself so that you can live in Christ. Because the incredible thing is the way Jesus gave his life up for you. And I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that you had better do this. Just like I wouldn't want you to stand up here and point at me and say, you had better do this. But I just want you to consider how much Jesus gave up for you so that you might experience new life. Because I'll guarantee you, he lived a better life than you. He lived a holier life than you. And yet, he died in your place. He took the punishment you deserve. And now gives you that life freely. Because you're his son. You're his daughter. So this week, I want you to consider the call to come and die. Those are hard words to say. I want you to, this week, to consider the words, the invitation to come and die. And to kind of just close our time, I just want you to see how Jesus handled this a little bit and the way that he did it. In fact, if you were to read through this chapter, and if you did this week, go back and kind of look at this, but if you read it this coming week, I want you to look at chapter 25 again. And there's three themes that kind of come out of this, that kind of point us on to whether or not we're on track with giving our lives away. Three things that will help you identify if you're really responding to the call to come and die, okay? Here's a couple of those things. Number one, you will know you're dying well if you seek the praise of God and not of men. In fact, I would jot these down if I were you, because you're going to want to wrestle over these this week. It means you take this home and really pray through this. These are things you're going to want to look for. You will know you're dying well, that you're denying yourself, picking up your cross, and following Jesus well, if you seek the praise of God and not of men. In fact, that's what kept the Pharisees from believing Jesus. If you read on in page 365 in here, you'd see that Pharisees secretly were wanting to believe in Jesus, but because they sought the praise of men and to keep their positions in the synagogue, they did not publicly come out and say, we're going to follow Jesus, because they valued the praise of men rather than the praise of God. So number one, you'll know you're dying well if you seek the praise of God and not of men. Number two, you'll know you are dying well if even in the face of oppression, you keep on blessing. You'll know you're dying well if even when you're facing oppression, you'll keep on blessing. It's really easy for us to make excuses for why we can't or don't have time or enough energy to be a blessing to our neighbors, our city, the people around us. And if we're really brutally honest with ourselves, our calendars reflect that, right? I mean, so much of our calendars, our time is spent on what we want to pursue, right? And so little of it is spent on what God's calling us to do. We'll squeeze church in, we'll squeeze in core group, we'll squeeze in this discipleship thing when we have time. And so many other things take priority. And don't hear me saying that your job is a terrible priority. It is a good priority. Don't hear me saying that. Don't hear me for what I'm not saying. But I simply just want us to ask the question this week as a family. am I dying well? Am I still blessing people even in the face of oppression? And then the third one is this. You'll know you're dying well when you sacrifice for those who can give you nothing in return. You'll know you're dying well when you sacrifice for those who can give you nothing in return. In this chapter, there's a beautiful glimpse of Jesus surrounded by this huge crowd of men and women and children. And in the middle of all this crowd, kids start rushing Jesus, just wanting to touch Jesus and sit by Jesus and be close to Jesus. And what do the disciples do? Man, the disciples, you got to love them. What do they start doing? They start holding back all the kids and saying, no, you can't do this. In fact, it says they rebuked the children. Here are all these children wanting to run to Jesus, and all the disciples are kind of like playing crowd control and especially keeping all the kids back, you know. But what is it that Jesus says? He says, let the children come to me. Do you think Jesus is going to get a whole lot back from serving little kids? I mean, even if Jesus' priorities were a little off kilter, and he wasn't this way, but you could see how Jesus would want to serve people, adults, people who have good paying jobs, because, hey, if I can win them over, then they'll start giving more money to this, or they'll start showing more appreciation for what we do, or they'll serve in this way or that way. But instead, Jesus goes to the least of these. He goes to the lonely, the hurting, all the poor and powerless, right? We were just singing about that. Those are the folks Jesus is going to. And then he finds himself surrounded by these kids, and he says, let them come too. In the middle of all this, we find that denying ourselves, picking up our cross, and following Jesus requires lots of sacrifice, because you're going to be called to serve in ways. And you're going to be called to serve people who can't give you anything back. And maybe you even never see results in that relationship, or you never see fruit come back because they can't give you anything back. But that's exactly who Jesus served. Next week, we're going to see how Jesus died. Next week, we're looking at the story of Good Friday. And in that, we're going to learn how to come and die. So if you don't show up next week, totally understand. It's not easy. But here's what I want to offer you. After all these words of challenge, this intense, very heavy conversation that we're having, here's my promise to you. This church is alongside you in it. We may not have all the answers. I don't have them. Our core group leaders don't have them. But man, we're in it with you, because we're learning this too. So don't give up. Don't be scared away. You got people alongside you, even for this hard stuff.